Hi, welcome to another session of Searching for Answers, the program where we really dig into the text of the Bible thoughtfully, carefully, perceptively, and sometimes we have a little fun along the way as well. On our panel this evening, several good colleagues, Dr. Bernard Taylor, Old Testament specialist, but he knows a whole bunch about the New Testament as well. Also, Dr. William Johnson, Bill Johnson, known well to many Adventists as author of several books, including one on the Epistle to the Hebrews. In Full Assurance, I think is the title.
Actually, I have four.
Yeah, right. And Dr. Richard Rice, systematic theology and Christian philosophy professor here at Loma Linda University, and author of a number of books, including one entitled Suffering and the Search for Meaning, a helpful book that looks at 7 different ways of understanding reversals, hardship, and loss in our lives. I must get that one, Rick. I must read that. Dr. Leo Rancelin is a professor of New Testament studies here at Loma Linda University and is the Associate Dean of the School of Religion as well. My name is John Jones, and at La Sierra University in the Divinity School there, and we are in the middle of the middle with Hebrews. We are right at the turning point between chapters 7 and 8. And Bill, I'm going to ask you if there are some connections and some sort of transitions as well between 7 and 8 that we need to watch for as we move now from chapter 7 and into chapter 8.
Yes, I think the chapter break here at the end of chapter 7 is well placed. In some other parts of Hebrews, it's not well placed. In chapter 7, the writer has been talking about Jesus as high priest. It's an idea he introduced at the end of chapter 6. And he is dealing with an objection that some of the readers would have had. How can you say that Jesus is a priest? He comes from the wrong tribe. He comes from Judah. He doesn't come from the priestly tribe. And the writer here says that's true. He doesn't come from Levi, but he is the priest of a new order, the order of Melchizedek. And so in the Old Testament, it was predicted, it's in Psalm 110, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And that was looking forward to Jesus. And so he's not only qualified to be a priest, the apostle will argue he's a better priest. And his priesthood is a better priesthood. In what way? Number one, it goes on forever. The Aaronic priests were many. They served their time, they died, others took their place. Jesus, one forever. What other ways? Well, he's a sinless high priest. Doesn't need to offer sacrifices for himself. He's totally without sin. In fact, he is a son, and that is a loaded term in Hebrews, pointing to his divine nature. And so that's what chapter 7 is about. It's a closely reasoned chapter. And as we move into chapter 8, we're embarking on a long theological passage that will run through 10:18, 8:1 to 10:18. And we'll turn from the person of Jesus, priest, to the work of Jesus as sacrifice. And so these are the ideas that we'll get into in chapter 8 and which we'll see developed more fully in chapters 9 and 10.
So he's a special kind of priest, a very exalted one. He's both faithful and merciful. These are the qualities. But now, of course, the question is, okay, so what does he do? And that's where we're headed with chapter 8, isn't it?
Right.
You want to get us into 8 a little bit? Take the first, a few verses there.
Maybe the first 7 verses.
Sure.
It starts this way. Now, the main point in what we're saying is this. We have such a high priest one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister in the sanctuary and the true tent that the Lord, not any mortal, has set up. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Hence it's necessary for this priest also to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. They offer worship in a sanctuary that is a sketch, a shadow of the heavenly one. For Moses, when he was about to erect a tent, was warned, "See that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain." But Jesus has now obtained a more excellent ministry, and to that degree, he is mediator of a better covenant, which has been enacted through better promises. For if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no need to look for a second one.
So the first one is good, but inherently limited, apparently, in some sense.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah. So the first thing he does here is to talk about the better priest, Jesus the better priest, is minister in a better sanctuary. All through this book of Hebrews, we've seen that over and over, the good and the better. All that came before was good, but with Jesus, we have the ultimate.
The logic is tightly interwoven and tightly developed here, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Leo, what jumps out at you when you look at this? There's a lot there, so
Yes.
I'm not hitting you with an exposition of the whole thing, but what strikes you as we turn this corner into chapter 8 now?
Well, the very first verse, right?
Yeah.
The main point in what we're saying is this. We have such a high priest who sits at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. And immediately I'm taken back to the prologue, right? Where he essentially said the same thing. And so as I read the prologue again in chapter 1, there's this notion that God has appointed him heir of all things. He's the one who created the universe. The radiance of God's glory. He's the exact imprint of his essence. He sustains everything by the word of his power, and then he sits at the right hand of the majesty on high. Mm-hmm. Am I to import all that, those notions, that incredibly high Christology here at the outset of chapter 8? And I think, seems to me, the author suggests that I ought to do that. And so I've thought perhaps of the prologue as kind of in the thesis, perhaps, of the whole book, of which he wishes to unpack to all of his readers of how magnificent and awesome Jesus truly is.
Yeah. So now he's starting to show us what was lurking in all of these pregnant opening sentences back here somehow. Yeah, who else would like to jump in on this? Bernard, what do you see?
Yeah, I find it, as we have gone through, I've become very conscious of the source for the text that he references here, and in particular with Melchizedek. He never quotes Genesis directly. And I think that there is a sequencing issue. Genesis establishes that the first priesthood, there was a priesthood prior to the Levitical priesthood, and Melchizedek was that one. But in his logic, that doesn't fit. And so he goes to the Psalms, and Psalm 110, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." So for his readers, he establishes that there is an alternative priesthood, which is important. And in chapter 6, you wonder about this mention of high priest, and the book of Hebrews is the only one that exegetes that.
Yeah.
So we have two priests, and then in chapter 8, now if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. Well, wasn't Melchizedek on earth? Wasn't he here? And at this point, we entirely separate the two. because Melchizedek, to be a Melchizedekian priest, required that you not be on earth because earthly priests are mortal. Therefore, Melchizedek can only be filled with one who is eternal, and Christ is the only one who meets that. So we move right out of the sphere we were into the divine, and that justifies we have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand.
So Melchizedek gives this author a way of separating Jesus from the Aaronic priesthood, the ordinary. But now the task is to separate Jesus from Melchizedek.
And to put
in a
Melchizedek
higher-
after Levi.
Right.
And so Psalms provides that.
Interesting.
But after this chapter, chapter 7, Melchizedek is gone.
Right.
Yes.
He falls by the wayside.
He's just there to establish that point, the legitimacy of Jesus' priesthood.
The legitimacy and the uniqueness. Of
And the
Jesus.
uniqueness,
right,
yeah.
right.
There's something I might mention, John, here. The language he uses here about the earthly sanctuary and the heavenly, verse 8. He talks about the earthly being a sketch or a shadow, a figure. I'm not sure what your translation may tell you.
Icon, isn't it?
And this language has been noticed, certainly by commentators, because it is exactly the same as we find in the writings of one Philo Judaeus, who lived just prior to the writing of this book. Okay, he was a Jew, but he was a Hellenized Jew from Alexandria, and he described the heavenly sanctuary and the earthly in exactly the same terms. And so some people, many commentators, a great commentary by Dr. Moffat argues that that is the key to understanding what's going on here. If I might just give my reaction to that, I think there are strong parallels in that it's like a two-order reality, an earthly and a heavenly.
And the real is the heavenly.
And the real is the heavenly. What is on earth is not unreal, but the ultimately real is the heavenly. But the difference between Philo and the author of Hebrews is this. Time is critical in the book of Hebrews. And you'll see this when we come to chapter 10. Jesus becomes a high priest. And if I might pick up chapter 10:1, the law has only a shadow of the good things to come, not the true form of these realities. And so you have like the vertical plane is crossed now by a horizontal plane, a time plane. And that is quite different from Philo. Events in time are critical to the argument of the book of Hebrews.
Jesus becomes a priest.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's not inherently from eternity past
Yeah,
a priest.
in the thinking of Philo, which is of course Plato, the ultimately real are in heaven. They're the great archetypes. On earth we have just shadows of those. But the things in heaven are eternal and unchanged. But in Hebrews, no, there is change. Time is critical.
Rick, any aspect of that or anything else that rings your bell here as we look at this?
The things that ring my bell, not quite on as high a pitch as I've heard so far this evening from our biblical scholars, but you know, when I think about Jesus as priest and I think about priesthood, the question that comes to my mind is, okay, why do I need a representative?
Yeah.
Understanding that a priest is a representative, okay? And when do I need an advocate? And how important is it that the advocate be qualified for me? And it seems to me the author is sort of saying, you've got the best representation you could possibly get. So when you get in trouble, especially legally, you want somebody who's never lost a case, or somebody who knows the court, knows all the rules of jurisprudence. And when you discover you've been represented well, it can be a source of great reassurance. I got in trouble when I was in 8th grade in band. Did I tell you the story?
You've told it in
I've
my
told it
class,
before,
but
okay.
It's a great story.
No,
All right, shall I go ahead?
No, yeah, right.
Anyway,
by all means, yeah.
I came early to band. I played the clarinet in the junior high band, and we met in the auditorium of the high school next door. And the door was locked, and it was about 5 minutes. Time to go in. So my dad was an Eagle Scout, so I always carried a pocket knife with me, and I opened it up, and I opened the door, and we went in.
Of course.
And then I found out later I had violated a terrible standard by going through a locked door. We don't do that here at Loma Linda Academy, okay? It was not far from here. You're out of band. So I went off wondering what would happen to me. Well, my teacher told me that I could go and explain and confess to the principal of the academy. And then he said something that encouraged me to do that. I had to go and sit in his office and say I was sorry and this would never happen again. But he said, you know, the principal of the grade school here really spoke up for you. Told the principal of the academy what kind of student you were, and I guess said some nice things about me. So the reassurance that I had been represented
Well,
gave me, I mean, I was still intimidated, but it gave me some degree of hope that it would be resolved. Now that's trivial, and that's from a childhood, but I think when you discover that you are in a situation beyond your capacity to solve, and there's somebody there with the knowledge, the skill, and perhaps as equally important, an understanding of you and what you're going through, and says, hey, trust me. I've been there. I'll take your case. I can assure you that everything will work out all right. I mean, I see this sort of strategy here as providing an enormous base of assurance that however profound your problems are, you've got one who's on your side and will take your case to the highest authority, and you can be confident that things will work out. Now, I know that's a kind of a homiletical gloss here, and I don't know how exegetically defensible it is, but that's the kind of thing that I would get on a practical level out of what I take to be the author's assurance that you are well taken care of.
There's actually a couple of texts that support what he just said.
I was
Perhaps
looking
we
at
ought
it.
to,
exactly.
Yeah.
chapter 4:14, therefore, since we have such a great high priest who passed through the heavens, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession, for we do not have a high priest unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who was tempted in every respect like as we are, yet without sin.
Right. So he's been
That
where
gets
we
at-
are. He knows where
Exactly.
we're going.
Exegetically, that
And then
supports
there's
what
this
you've just
text
said.
in 7:25. He's able to save
Yeah.
for all time or to the uttermost or completely those who approach God through him.
Right.
Because he's always there.
Yeah, always. Yes, even 2,000 years later. And that's important to be able to claim, isn't it?
That's what I get out
So
of this,
this is
John.
more than, well, hey, this is more than a mere knowledge of the technicalities of the law. Obviously, that metaphor applies, even as the priestly temple worship metaphor applies here. But the real cutting issue is that helps us to understand this strange language about Jesus learning and having been made perfect, for example, in chapter 5, verse 9 and 10. Here, and 8, 9, and 10 of chapter 5. Here is, I think, the quality that you're describing of utter sympathy and identity with. That goes far beyond merely a technical expertise of some kind, doesn't it?
You want a representative that understands where you are, but is a lot better at getting where you want to be.
Right. Well said. Well said. Bernard, anything else that you would like to jump in on?
I'm wondering whether we've gone far enough to wonder about the reason for this being written. Again, Hebrews is the only one that addresses the high priest.
Yeah.
And as we have gone through, we have seen evidences that the audience was likely Jewish Christians who were perhaps tempted to go back. And I'm wondering if to the sacrificial system in particular. And so the apostle in his sermon here has built such a strong case for Jesus in his superior position after the order of Melchizedek. And all of it comes out of the book of Psalms and is so Jewish and straightforward in its presentation that I think sometimes people have read Hebrews and thought that this was some sort of artificial reconstruction, but as we've taken the time to go through carefully, we see how clearly he is understanding the book of Psalms, which brings him to chapter 8 and this unsurpassed high priestly, in the real sense, otherworldly high priest that is there for us in such bold contrast. This isn't a little better. This is very much better.
Yes, we must not somehow fall short in our vision of what this is about. We must not trivialize it. This is, we've already been told in chapter 6 it's serious. Now we're being told that it is really superior and exalted, isn't it?
John,
Please.
maybe a final word on our friend Melchizedek. Okay?
Yeah.
It's interesting, in the writings of the Dead Sea Scroll, the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find in some of the scrolls references to Melchizedek. One scroll in particular is centered in his ministry in the heavenly sanctuary, Melchizedek. So, you know, I think this Hebrews is written to Jewish Christians, and there are at least some Jewish Christians who give a lot of weight to Melchizedek in a heavenly sanctuary. And also worship of angels, okay, very prominent there among the Dead Sea people there, Qumran. So I think that is playing in the background also.
Interesting.
So he is, again, Melchizedek, remember what he said in chapter 7, that Jesus is not like Melchizedek. Melchizedek is like Jesus. The point of reference is Jesus, not Melchizedek. So I think maybe, you know, he's killing several birds with one stone here in this argument.
Yes, for our viewers, Melchizedek really appears in what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, just in a couple of passages. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
But among those kind of monkish recluses living out near the Dead Sea in the time of Christ, sometime before, and up until about AD 70, they had their own version of Judaism kind of going there, didn't they?
Yeah.
And they had serious doubts about the temple in Jerusalem, as I recall. But they did have some other writings that don't appear in our Old Testament. I think you're referring particularly to the Testament of Levi in the Dead Sea Scrolls among their collection, or of Dan, was it?
I think isn't it Scroll 11, or Cave 11?
From Cave 11,
That's
yes.
often called the Melchizedek
That's
Scroll.
right, the Melchizedek Scroll,
Yeah.
which really does have a lot to say about him, but it's a kind of a sanctified imagination at work, isn't it, in some way? But it makes clear that they saw a lot of meaning here, and that they could build a kind of an alternative priestly system around his figure. So that provides ammunition in a convenient sort of way to this work. Now comes the question. As I think we have each in our own way reminded our viewers, Yah this is clearly, it's to the Hebrews, it's not to the Gentiles. But we're Gentiles, and we're 2,000 years later, and we don't have the same hooks to hook into. Now, as we go on through 8 and 9, I think we may begin to see some hooks that we can hang our faith on as well. But is there anything about that aspect of it in the year 2017 on the other side of the world that we want to pick up already at this point? Is there any particular piece that speaks to our human hearts? Rick, you've done that very well in a way already. Are there other aspects of this that speak to us?
Well, one very quick one, where he contrasts the earthly and the heavenly,
Yeah.
and calls the earthly a sketch
Yeah.
or a shadow, a parable. To me, it's a reminder that there's more than this world. Okay, and we've become so used to thinking, because of the wonderful successes of science and technology, that only that which can be weighed, which can be seen, can be felt. That's the only thing that's real. Okay, and that is real. But Hebrews and the whole Bible would remind us that there is an ultimate reality beyond the reality of this earth. And I have to continually remind myself of that. The poet Wordsworth years ago said, the world is too much with us.
With us, yes.
Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers.
Yeah.
And so we become very much creatures of this world. But the book of Hebrews takes us beyond that and says, hey, the ultimate is where Jesus is.
Well, maybe that Hellenistic kind of post-Platonic idea of two levels of meaning, if we recognize the differences, the chronology that you point out, nonetheless, we are so much hung up with the material world in which we live today. Maybe we need Plato through Philo, through the author of Hebrews, to remind us that there are other realities and that we do, in some way, march to the beat of a different drum with all of our preoccupations, that in some way, with every breath that we draw, the kingdom of heaven is there lurking behind and above and beyond us somehow. And if we get that out of Hebrews, I think we've already gained a lot of ground in our spiritual life, haven't we? It is so easy for us to lose sight of all that is of ultimate meaning for us. Yes, Rick, even with all the suffering as well, I think, summon us to see beyond and behind all of that in some ways. I would like to sit in on your class on God and human suffering and get that. So here Hebrews is saying to us, two levels, keep them both in mind as you go through life. And we'll pick up on this again next time on Searching for Answers.